Hey listeners, Catherine here. I'm super excited about our new sponsor because it is a female and minority owned wine bar. Yes, that's right, it's STEM Wine Bar, offering Oregon's largest selection of wines by the glass with more than 150 to choose from, including natural and biodynamic producers, so try out a tasting plate there. STEM's heated outdoor patio is located on North Mississippi Avenue, right here in Portland, where you can drop in or you can book a private tasting. They also offer free same-day delivery for residents within 30 miles and shipping to those outside of the delivery area. So go to stemwinebarpdx.com to learn more or order a wine delivery right to your door. Thank you, STEM.
Hello, I'm editor Keelan King, and welcome to The Foretop, a roundtable discussion of the hot button topics in food and beverage featuring leaders, thinkers, and innovators. And now, here's your host, Catherine Cole.
Hello, and welcome to episode 81 of The Foretop. It's a roundtable discussion of today's hot button topics in food and beverage. I'm your host, Catherine Cole. We are calling this episode Judgment and Junk Food. We're going to take a look at the role of McDonald's restaurants following the civil rights movement, fast food's societal significance, and finally, we're going to talk about our bodies. We are joined by three leaders in this conversation. Dr. Marcia Chatelain is an author and distinguished professor of history and African American studies at Georgetown University. Roxane Gay is an author many times over, an advice columnist and contributing op-ed writer at the New York Times, co-host of the Here to Slay podcast, and many other things besides. Whitney Trotter, MS, RD, LDN, RN, BSN, is founder of Bluff City Health in Memphis and co-founder and board director of RestoreCorps, an organization fighting against human trafficking. Wow, what a lineup. I'm so in awe of this group, and I'm really looking forward to this virtual conversation we're having today. Let's start our Judgment and Junk Food episode by taking a look at McDonald's. I think many of our listeners are probably self-professed food snobs who eat a lot of fresh organic vegetables and have a pretty poor opinion of fast food chains. But Marcia Chatelain, you have a recent book out entitled Franchise that paints a really nuanced and ultimately conflicted portrait of the McDonald's Corporation. What do you think we should know about McDonald's, and what might surprise us about it?
Well, one of the reasons I wrote Franchise was because when I was in graduate school, I was getting more and more interested in like the food movement and food justice circles. And one of the things that I noted is that a lot of these circles were mostly white, and they often talked about junk food in this really, really pejorative way. And it seemed like food became an excuse for racism, excuses to belittle communities of color. And so I was really fascinated about the ways that history seemed really absent from these conversations. And so I decided to write a book about how McDonald's became Black and the ways that after Martin Luther King's assassination in 1968, there were all of these calls for more Black businesses, more corporate investment in Black communities, and the ways that McDonald's showed up. And so Franchise is the story about people's relationships to fast food that has very little to do with the actual food and the affect, the set of feelings that fast food inspired in communities, as well as the way that McDonald's has ingratiated itself into stories of Black progress and Black culture.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a fascinating book. And it really, in the beginning, it seems like it provided this egalitarian atmosphere for customers after segregation, a place where food was delivered uniformly without consideration for one's social standing, I think, as you write. But then as McDonald's started to open up opportunities to own franchises to folks living in Black communities, it was sort of came with, as you write, an asterisk, ownership with an asterisk. What did that mean for Black franchisees?
Well, there's two things that someone like myself who's obsessed with fast food is very aware of. Fast food is weird because a franchise is the right to own a business and not own it at the same time. No franchise owner owns the land on which McDonald's is built. You can't make any tweaks in the menu if it saves you money or if you feel like experimentation. So fast food franchises have a lot of rules, and they give you the right to assume all the liability of doing their business in hopes that you make a lot of money. So this idea that if Black people franchise McDonald's, it has this trickle down effect in Black communities is how the idea was sold. And from the perspective of 1968, I see why people were super invested and really excited by the possibilities. But now that we can see around the corner of the ways that McDonald's is dependent on low-wage jobs, there was recently this huge lawsuit where Black franchise owners felt discriminated against. Some of the Black-themed McDonald's commercials are really cringy. And it didn't quite open up this land of opportunity that people thought it would 50 years ago. But I think that part of the presence of McDonald's in Black neighborhoods is part of the story that a lot of public health folks don't take into account when they're castigating people for eating hamburgers.
You write a book that portrays a corporation that's opening up economic opportunities in Black communities and creating gathering places for those communities. And in fact, has continued to be an important gathering place even today, as during riots and protests. I think you open the book in Ferguson after the killing of Michael Brown, and everyone is finding refuge in the McDonald's there. They're even using milk from that McDonald's to get the tear gas out of their eyes. I mean, it's really quite dramatic. The role McDonald's plays there.
Absolutely. McDonald's and chaos kind of go hand in hand. And so it was the uprising after Martin Luther King's assassination that got a lot of white franchise owners to essentially do white flight and leave Black communities because they don't want to do business there. And then this gives the opportunities for Black people to franchise. And McDonald's stays open during the LA uprising. It stays open during the Ferguson summer. There was a viral photo that was actually not true that said in Minneapolis, McDonald's had been burned down, right? And so there's a way that the hyper concentration of fast food in communities of color and the hyper policing and the uprisings in communities of color kind of come together. And the reason partly why I wrote this book is that after 1992, when Los Angeles was inflamed after Rodney King's beating and the police officers in that situation were acquitted, McDonald's actually sent out a press release saying that we were protected during the uprising because we are a part of the community and people love us so much. And I thought that was such a wildly inappropriate thing to disseminate. But it's like, the McDonald's recent Twitter post where they talk about Black Lives Matter. It's like, read the room. But the point is that these narratives become convincing because they write themselves into the story of progress after King's assassination that is far more complicated than what we're told on the surface.
Yeah, and you also portray this corporation that's kind of taking over a role that the government should really be taking, and then they're taking all this credit for it. But it's just kind of like, why is McDonald's doing this? Like, you write about how they were instrumental in the creation of the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. So why is there a corporate underwriter for this holiday that should be just, there should be something that the nation should embrace as a whole? It shouldn't be pushed by a corporation, right?
Well, this is the thing. So McDonald's in some communities is the senior center. McDonald's in some places is the only playground. It is the job training program for youth. It's a place if a person has a felony conviction that they might be able to get a job. It's doing all of these things. And I think in Black communities, this type of intervention is normalized because the state has gutted all the resources and has completely divested. And, part of the reason why I wrote this is that I'm a historian of African-American life and culture. And my first real interaction with Black history in high school came through something that was sponsored by Black franchise owners of McDonald's. It is not lost on me, this role. But when we think about that type of presence in Black communities, I think it raises different questions about what exactly the problem is. It's not individual food choices. It's problems that exist under capitalism.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I want to hear from our other guests. Whitney, you're based in Memphis, which was obviously a center of the civil rights movement. It's where the Civil Rights Museum is located. Have you noticed that there's sort of an interesting relationship between McDonald's and the local community there?
Oh, wow. Yeah. This conversation is like giving me life. I wish you guys could see me. I have goosebumps all up and down my arm. So it's so interesting. My husband is actually originally from College Park, which is, I used to say Atlanta, but then he told me, he's like, no, it's College Park. So I spent a good majority of time in Atlanta where the birthplace of Martin Luther King. And then now we live in Memphis, where the assassination happened. And it's so interesting because you see, and there's a lot of comparison of what Memphis should have been. Why are there other, and especially as you think of Atlanta, Atlanta is very progressive for Black franchise owners. But in Memphis, we don't have that. So, and if you look at, and I literally, as you guys were talking, I was like in my mind picturing McDonald's in all of the Black community. So, Orange Mound is a community in Memphis, which I believe is either the first or second oldest Black community in the United States. And if you look at Orange Mound, there are very few Black businesses in Orange Mound. And I'll have to look at this, but I don't even think the McDonald's that is there is owned in Black ownership. And then another thing that's really interesting, so about 10 miles from the Civil Rights Museum is the Joan Kroc Center. And what's really interesting about the Joan Kroc, the Salvation Army, and the connection with McDonald's is it sits on the intersection that has some of the lowest property values, the hardest hit communities in terms of socioeconomics, food deserts, but also some of the wealthiest people in Memphis live there. So it's so interesting having this conversation with the dynamic of the role of McDonald's and the Salvation Army with the Joan Kroc Center and trying to integrate kind of the social justice and racial disparities in Memphis. And Memphis is very unique in the fact that we have so many food deserts, and McDonald's has kind of become that place that people can rely on food. And in my practice, I specialize in eating disorders. And, we typically think of eating disorders as an affluent, straight white woman disease, right? But my practice is very diverse. And one of the issues is with, reframing the social justice movement and eating disorders is that you have Black clients that don't have access to food, and that contributes to eating disorders. And so you will have clients that maybe they are binging and going to McDonald's, but that's the only food that they have in their vicinity. So it is a very interesting dynamic as we talk about the role of McDonald's and how it plays in the Black community.
And that food is, well, we'll talk about this a bit in the next topic, but the food is pretty much designed to make you want to binge on it, which is just, Whitney, I want to back you up a little bit for those who don't know who Joan Kroc was. She was the third wife of Ray Kroc, the founder, or I guess one of the founders of McDonald's, and has kind of a funny story that after he died, she basically gave all his money away to progressive causes, and he was very conservative. So sort of an interesting side note. Yeah. Roxane, I haven't heard from you. I think I love your Twitter feed, by the way. I saw you tweeting about Travis Scott, the rapper's special branded McDonald's meal. Get in here. Let's hear from you.
Yes. I saw that Travis Scott has a branded meal, and he's only actually the second celebrity to ever get a branded meal. And it was just so unexpected because McDonald's is extraordinarily conservative in terms of their image and their branding. And he's a hip hop artist and a very good one. And, he curses in his music and he talks about sexuality and all the kinds of things that you would think McDonald's would not be interested in. So I just thought it was interesting. But what was even funnier is that it's like not really that special of a meal. Just a quarter pounder with cheese and fries with barbecue sauce and a Sprite. And so, this is the world that we live in.
So
Yeah.
so Marcia, what is going on with
Oh
that?
my God. It was, I think last week, Kate Taylor, who writes a lot about McDonald's and race for Business Insider, she tweeted about it. And I did a thread of like McDonald's advertising to Black people. And the first ad comes out of 1969, where they tried to bring Black models into You Deserve a Break Today. Then they hired Burrell Communications out of Chicago to do their ethnic marketing. And Black celebrities are all over McDonald's. The specification of like a special meal associated with person, that is very new. But in the 70s, they tried to have these different meals for Black customers. The McBeefsteak, which was supposed to be like a date night McDonald's item. I write about in the book when they tried to market the chicken sandwich to Black consumers. Everyone was really confused in these test marketing groups because it was like a patty and it looked like a chicken hamburger. And people would be like, where's the bone? Where's the gravy? And what they determined is you didn't have to improve the quality of the food. You just had to make people feel special for being offered the food. And that was like when my mind was blown about like how the fast food industry is so not about the actual food itself, but it's all about feeling and this idea that you're welcome here. We made this just for you. We are part of your culture. There's like YouTube is like the best for it because there's all sorts of ads with gospel music. They used to have a national double Dutch team.
Yes, I remember that.
And they would have commercials with it. You've got Ronald McDonald rapping. And so, again, using Black cultural form to sell McDonald's has a long history. This Travis Scott thing is a big Hail Mary right now for them because they are desperate and they're losing a lot of market share among consumers of color.
So where do you predict they go from here, Marcia?
I think that McDonald's is going to continue to flounder, not only because of coronavirus, but the landscape of food that you can get quickly has changed, right? So when I was a kid, fast casual wasn't a thing. Now that it is, and for a few dollars more, you can get food that tastes better. That's not necessarily quote unquote more nutritious, but is served in a sterile environment that makes people feel like they're eating something better. And I think McDonald's just has not been able to compete with that market, as well as like the other fast food brands, I think are just better. Like the food tastes better. And I think that makes a huge difference.
I think that's I'm sorry to have to bring an end to this conversation, but that's a fun note to end on. And we have to squeeze in our other two sections of the show. But first, we're going to take a sponsor break. We will be right back with the conversation in a quick minute. Hello, dear listeners. I'm really pleased to let you know about our sponsor, which is a new wine brand called Chemistry. It's a collaboration between two Oregon wineries, Stoller and Chehalem, which are both certified B corporations, and that means that they have met the highest standard of verified social and environmental performance, public transparency, and legal accountability. Chemistry is a brand that Stoller and Chehalem have created for everyday enjoyment, and I have been given the arduous task of tasting their wines. I'm sorry, I have to do it while I'm reading this. And I must say, what I'm tasting is delicious. It is the Chemistry Willamette Valley Pinot Noir Rosé Bubbles. This is a sparkling wine, and you know from the fact that it has the word bubbles printed on the label that it is going to be very affordable. And it is at just $20 retail per bottle. This Willamette Valley Pinot Noir is dry with a refreshing peach pit astringency, plus notes of raspberry syrup. And yes, those are my tasting notes because I am tasting this right now. For all you wine geeks out there, yes, I have the tech sheet. The pH is 3.26, the ABV is 12.5%. It is an all stainless steel every night wine. And if you don't understand what I just said, don't worry about it. Just enjoy this delicious wine. Pop a bottle tonight. You won't regret it. Thank you so much, Chemistry, for supporting the show. And now we are back, moving on to our second topic. We've been talking about the world's best known fast food chain, and that got us on the Four Top team thinking about the term junk food. That word junk passes judgment not only on the restaurants that serve fast food, but on the people who dine there, as Marcia was saying. There are also ingrained societal stereotypes that associate large-bodied people with the so-called junk food, and I just thought we'd maybe examine this a bit with these experts we have here today. Whitney Trotter, you're a nutritionist as well as a body positive therapist. So I'm wondering, what do you hear from patients about judgment and junk food?
Absolutely. So it is, in my work as an eating disorder dietitian, it's a lot of reframing. And especially, again, if you're talking with somebody that has a history of food insecurity and trauma, if we continue to stereotype food, all it does is it shames them. And then on the counter of that, orthorexia is an eating disorder, and it's the obsession with eating organic and, clean eating. But what if somebody doesn't have the financial resources to eat that way? So I really do look at it as, how do we get somebody progressing in their recovery journey and not being integrated in the shame based? So a lot of it is I do an extensive kind of food recall when I'm doing my initial assessment, but I also ask them about food accessibility of what they like. Do they even have access if they're of a different culture? Do they even have access to their culture? One of the things in Memphis is in one of the communities, it is very heavily populated with refugees and immigrant families. And we noticed several years ago there was not access to a grocery store there. And so a lot of them were making meals based on what they could get at a convenience store. So they're literally living and thriving based on the food that they can get at the corner mark. So if we then, instead of advocating for community farms, community programs, and fruits and vegetables, we shame them, and the only thing that they're able to eat to survive. And we know that certain foods do different things for our body. So in no way am I saying, don't eat fruits, don't eat vegetables, don't eat, protein. But I am saying that we can't come of it from a shame-based mentality when we're trying to heal somebody's journey with food in their body.
It seems like there's this sort of idea that health and the health industry is an affluent white woman privilege and no one else can have
Absolutely.
access to it. And Marcia, I've heard you previously talking about, this attitude of why doesn't everyone just eat kale?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. It's like, everybody doesn't want to eat quinoa and kale, right? And it's like, why is that the standard of health and beauty? And we see this again, not to monopolize the conversation with eating disorders, but we see this in eating disorder treatment centers. They cater to a certain demographic that is not representative of people of color, and it's very if you talk to other therapists, especially that have a social justice mindset, it is challenging finding eating disorder treatment centers that are safe for people of color, that will appreciate their culture and heritage, and give culturally appropriate foods.
Roxane, in your book Hunger, you talk about people actually approaching you in the grocery store and taking things out of your cart. I can't believe this is possible, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on this topic of judgment and junk food.
Well, we put a lot of judgment on food. And I think, especially in recent years, the denotation of food as clean has been one of the worst developments in eating because it implies that anything but clean food is bad for you, is dirty, is unacceptable. And Panera really led with this. And what's interesting is that most Panera stores are like literally filthy. And so I don't know that they know what the word clean means.
Wait, but so does Panera push clean food? I'm sorry, I haven't been in one in a few years.
Their whole marketing campaign for the past couple of years has been clean food. And it does contribute to orthorexia. And it's actually just grounded in a really false narrative because when you look at what they're actually serving, it has issues. And
Mhm.
it has the same amount of calories as something from McDonald's. And you see the Subway is the same way. And so I try not to put value judgments on food because, especially before I had weight loss surgery, people were really quite cruel and putting all kinds of judgments on what I was eating. And so it makes you have an eating disorder pretty quickly because you don't eat in public anymore and you don't go grocery shopping anymore. So you kind of become a shut-in a really weird way. But people feel very comfortable making judgments about what fat people eat and don't eat. And they have no problem like reaching into your cart and saying, you don't need this, and taking it out. And it would never cross my mind to do that. But it just shows, I'm not going to say that it's like the last prejudice. I think that that's overused, but people are very comfortable with fat phobia.
Yes, yes. I completely agree with you, Roxane. Yes. It's an issue and it's a stigma.
It really is. And it's so frustrating that we can't have really useful conversations about it, because when you try to start to talk about fat phobia, people say, well, you're a pox on the healthcare system, while they're smoking a cigarette, for example.
Right.
And it's so much more complicated than that. So many fat people don't get health care because they're afraid, because they know they're going to be judged. And so they put it off and they put it off and they put it off. And by the time they finally do go to a doctor, of course, they have a bunch of comorbidities. They haven't been to a doctor in 23 years. And so we really do have to destigmatize eating and bodies so that people can live better lives.
Absolutely. Roxane, I have a quick question for you. Have you read the book by Sabrina Strings, Fearing the Black Body?
I have not.
Oh, it was a game changer for my work in kind of the body positive, body acceptance, body liberation movement. And I was just so appreciative of the ideology of and the origins of fat phobia and why it's contributed to kind of disordered eating and eating disorders. But it's a really good resource, and it goes exactly to what you're saying about, we are existing in a culture that is so fat phobic and so weight centric that people are not getting quality access to healthcare and mental health care because of practitioners' biases. And there's no accountability, there's no accountability on these health professionals.
Absolutely not, because they get to hide behind the whole healthy or unhealthy lifestyle thing, or umbrella. And, you know, you can tell me all you want and show me all the studies you want, and I actually will listen to you. But when I come to you for a sore throat and I just need some penicillin, and you want to talk about my fatness, it's frustrating. And I really wish that we could have a more effective conversation and sort of destigmatize fatness.
I've always wondered about that. Like, why do they weigh you the moment you're like, I'm here because I have an ear infection. Why are you weighing me?
I was just thinking about that. I went to a medical practice where everyone was vegan, and I don't think I quite understood how committed they were. And I remember the doctor sitting down with me and saying, so let's say you're pre-diabetic. And I was like, I am. She's like, let's just start with that premise. And I was like, well, should I, what do you mean? And she said, well, what if you needed to take Lipitor? And I was like, oh my God, do I have heart? It's like, but it's like it's a way of communicating this kind of anxiety that, again, like between being weighed kind of superfluously and then the like assumptions about your level of health in order to, try to give you good care. I think to myself, like, if I didn't have to be here, I wouldn't go. Like, if I didn't need a medical form, I wouldn't be here. And I think to myself, like, if this is the way that we kind of frame care, and if this is the kind of, it's supposed to model a certain kind of like responsible way of existing in the world, this is like, it seems like every time you go to a new doctor, you set yourself up for this kind of vulnerability because of these practices.
Yes, absolutely. So harmful.
And so interesting, this terminology that's clean eating versus junk food, and like it's a total dichotomy. And then Whitney, you're saying, your clients are saying, I don't have access to anything other than this food that's called junk.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And not every client that I have in my eating disorder private practice, is this, but I actually do have quite a few clients though that they have food and they come from a history of food insecurity and lack of food accessibility. And if I was this dietitian that just reinforced this pretty perfect, clean, Panera driven ideology, the amount of shame that client would hold. I mean, and there are a lot of dietitians that practice and that way and view that way. And I just inherently feel that it leads to shame base, and it leads to it's a real social and food justice issue when kind of your recovery is focused on this quinoa kale clean diet, so.
The thing I think that's really interesting about this dichotomy about good and bad, clean and dirty, the idea that fast food isn't practical is something that also really bothered me when I was talking to people about my work. Because I would get kind of young food justice people saying, well, I work in communities and I just need to teach people how to cook. And I say to myself, well, have you asked if people have a consistent source of heating for food or refrigeration? I'm from the Midwest, and like when it gets really cold, there's a certain threshold where people will lose access to heating in their home and they don't have gas. So how are people cooking? The idea that people make choices to eat fast food because they don't have knowledge, rather than the fact that it's a lot of high dense calorie food really fast and cheap, is actually sometimes very reasonable and very practical, gets moved out of the equation. And everything is about, well, if you just teach people to do X, Y, and Z, then their outcomes will be consistent with our idea of what is good.
Yeah, it's people are equating consuming this food with laziness or being uninformed, where it's probably people are incredibly busy and, like you're saying, don't have the resources, don't have the time, aren't able to cook healthy food at home for very practical reasons. And I'm curious what you all think, in the of the many ways the world is criticizing our president right now. A lot of comedians and certainly a lot of folks on Twitter describe our president, Donald Trump, as sort of lazy and gluttonous and a fool. And they talk about that because he eats fast food. And I'm just curious how you all react to that.
Well, one of the worst things that Trump has done by existing is make people have to
Making people
have to sort of vaguely defend him, because the fat shaming that people on the left do, it shows their true prejudices, but they think it's okay to fat shame, to disability shame, because he's that odious. And the reality is he is that odious, and he does not weigh like 200 and whatever pounds he says he weighs. But we can't make fun of his weight and then say that we have great politics around bodies. You don't get to, have an ethical code that you apply when it's convenient and that you ignore when when you would prefer to ignore it. And that's really challenging. And I really hate that he ever makes me have to say anything even remotely positive around him, because he's just that terrible. And like, fuck him.
Yeah. I love that response. That was so good. Thank you, Roxane. Thank you.
But also, I'll say one more thing. He eats steak with ketchup, and I think that should be shamed.
Right. Well, the thing that's interesting about fast food and presidents, so Bill Clinton, when he ran for president, would always be, they'd take photographs of him in McDonald's. And one of the things that I thought was so interesting is when Toni Morrison wrote that essay about Bill Clinton being the first Black president, she was talking about him being relentlessly pursued by Congress, first of all. But if you read that essay and she enumerates his Blackness, she talks about him eating junk food, being from Arkansas, playing the saxophone. And there's this way that certain elites, when they consume fast food, it's considered inconsistent or wrong. And I always thought that was really fascinating how his Blackness, quote unquote, was associated with the fact that he liked McDonald's. And so there's these really interesting ways that Donald Trump, as a wealthy person who is not, quote unquote, classy, also gets kind of put into this idea of him eating fast food and then serving it at the White House.
And now let's take another sponsor break. Just hold tight, and we will be back to this fascinating conversation. And we are so lucky to have a compassionate company, Laughing Planet, returning once again as a sponsor this month. Laughing Planet is a restaurant with multiple locations in the Portland area that offers global flavors at an affordable price. Laughing Planet believes that a happy planet requires responsible decisions from plant to plate, so they source ingredients from local farmers and use recyclable and compostable materials. And they help out our community in more ways than one. During this COVID pandemic, Laughing Planet has been offering free kids' meals to students who otherwise rely on meal assistance programs at schools. You can get Laughing Planet delivered to your door or pick up at any location. Order over the phone, through DoorDash, or online. And if you want that 20% discount, use our promo code 4TOP at checkout. That's right, just enter FOURTOP as your promo code, and you will get 20% off your order. Give it a try, folks, and you'll be getting healthy, locally sourced food for cheap and supporting the 4Top. And now, back to the show. And now for our third course. This probably is just a natural continuation of topic number 2, but Roxane Gay, a sentence from your book, Hunger, has stuck with me ever since I read it. The subtitle of the book is A Memoir of My Body. And the quote was, "My body is treated as a public space." You write that due to your size, you often find yourself shoved, poked, prodded by complete strangers. How do you respond to the unsolicited and unwanted, we've talked about the advice, but also just physical interventions from others who really know nothing about you, but feel that they have some right to your body?
It depends. Most of the time, I think that on the page and on Twitter, I can say all kinds of things that don't necessarily come to me in the heat of the moment. And so I tend to just sort of turn inward and try to walk away from whatever it is. But when I'm with my wife, she's a barracuda and she doesn't take shit from anyone. And so when someone even gives me just a smidge of a sideways glance, she chews them up, and I love it. I just like to stand there and watch and just sort of see like what she's going to say next. And so I use that as fuel for when I'm alone to remember, like, if she's willing to stand up for me, then surely I should be willing to stand up for myself as well. And so I do try to do that. But it's really hard. It's really hard because, what these people are doing is telling you your worst fears and the most negative things that you think about yourself. And it takes a lot of effort to counteract that message, to tell yourself that, oh, they're actually wrong. I don't deserve to stay in hiding and to be full of shame and to, eat only gruel and water for the rest of my life. And so I just try to remind myself of these things while I'm hearing these very negative messages. Of course, the older I get, the more well-known I become, the more people leave me alone, which is great. But what about everyone who doesn't have that level of privilege? And so when I do stand up for myself, it's not really for myself because I'm going to be fine. It's for people who don't have any sort of privilege and who are expected to conform instead of be treated with dignity.
And, just as this week as we recorded, very sadly, the actor Chadwick Boseman passed away recently, and some news articles have come out, just horrific articles stating that people were sort of shaming him in his final months for being too skinny. And, he had his own private battle with cancer that he wasn't sharing. And there's what is it that people just feel like they can, if there's something about your body that they don't think is quite right, they feel like they can just get on your case. I don't understand it.
I think there's a lot of cultural entitlement to bodies, and especially to marginalized bodies. We see this with the Black body. We see this with women's bodies, with queer bodies. And so when Chadwick Boseman appeared and he was looking gaunt, people, of course, the thing is, you can't win. Either you're too thin or you're too fat, you're too willowy or you're too muscular. And so people were, thinking, oh, because he's a celebrity, I can say whatever and there are no consequences. And, people never really stop to think maybe there's a story behind this person's body. And I wish people would give more consideration to the fact that people are complex and there's often a story there. But I also don't think you need a story. Maybe that's just how you look. And there's no particular reason why. Like, we should all be, respectful of that.
And so much about celebrity culture, especially, superhero films, being a star, all of this idea of people's entitlement to your looks, because that is supposed to be part of what the fantasy that you're giving also creates a lot of this. I remember a few years ago, Lady Gaga there were pictures published of her, and she had gained weight like every person in the world does. And it was this interesting topic of conversation, and people asked her about it, and she said, "Oh, I just ate a lot of pasta at my family restaurant." Like, it's this kind of thing where there's supposed to be a story, and I know that like sometimes if an actor is not their body doesn't change for their craft or for a quote unquote legitimate reason, the scrutiny and the speculation about it becomes its own kind of monster.
Whitney, I'm curious to hear from you because you are also the co-founder of an organization that combats human trafficking. So I feel like you must have a very interesting perspective on the vulnerability of bodies and how bodies are just taken for granted and snatched and trafficked. Curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So, kind of the backstory, we started RestoreCore. It came from we were in another organization called Operation Broken Silence, and we split just to focus on human trafficking. And the executive director, Rachel Haga, and I, gosh, it's probably about 8 years ago, went to New Jersey, and we were learning about more about human trafficking, trying to set up safe houses and things like that. And I specifically asked the founder of this organization, do you think that human trafficking exists, or do you think that human trafficking victims have eating disorders? And her response was like, no. Most of our clients are women or children of color, and that doesn't really exist in this population. And I remember leaving because at the time I was the HIV dietitian for Memphis and Shelby County. And I remember leaving and just being so perplexed and confused. I was like, man, I just don't know that that's right. But now we are almost 10 years later, and there's very little research being done on, after victims, they come out of the life and they're working on survivorship and autonomy to food in their bodies. What is body image and satisfaction? And we know, I know from doing this work, being an eating disorder dietitian and working with victims, is human trafficking victims have eating disorders. They equally struggle with body image. If your body was used as a commodity and you had to exchange sex for food, clothing, and shelter, you cannot tell me that you're not going to then, walk that line of, body autonomy and choice of food and struggle. And not all clients of, not all victims of human trafficking have eating disorders, but I do think it's an unfair assumption to presume that they equally don't struggle with body image. I'm in school again, much to my husband's dismay. I promised him this was the last time, but
You're going to get more initials after your name.
Yeah, and more debt too, right? So I'm becoming I'm getting my doctorate to become a psychiatric nurse practitioner. One of the things I really am interested in studying is kind of this intersection of trafficking and eating disorders, disordered eating, because it is out there. I am hopeful to start doing some intuitive eating framework with the actual advocates that work in our safe house. I don't necessarily think it's appropriate to do intuitive eating when somebody's coming out of the life. And we do a lot of work here with women that are still engaged in sex work and different things like that. So we're actually going to kind of roll out a 8 to 10 week intuitive eating course just for advocates and caseworkers that work with this population to kind of reframe and rebuild their relationship with food and body that are serving this population. So I'm really excited about that.
Wow. And can you quickly define intuitive eating for those of us who don't know that term?
Yeah, so intuitive eating was established by Evelyn Tribbley and another dietitian, Elise Reich. I'm probably pronouncing her name wrong, so please forgive me. But it's an amazing framework that really is anti-diet, and it walks you through 10 various principles. And it looks at your relationship, internally and externally. And I know there's a lot of confusion out there about intuitive eating and what it is and what it's not. But I do want to say at the core, intuitive eating is not about weight loss. It very much is rooted in research about anti-diet. And I believe, don't quote me here if I'm wrong, but I believe, Roxane, do you do some intuitive eating framework as well?
I do. I haven't seen her in a while, but I have a nutritionist, and I was actually really resistant to the idea of a nutritionist, and then I found one who taught me about intuitive eating, which I did not know was a thing, and I have found it to be a very useful framework for me. It doesn't always work, but on the whole, it has made me chill out with myself about food in a way that nothing else has. I've been a vegetarian for many years, and I've tried other sort of really rigid eating schemas. And this is the one that has been the most useful for me. And I wish more people would understand, like, eat what you want and eat until you're satisfied.
Yes, yes, yeah, absolutely, Roxane. And I am, and I don't want to speak for the founders. I've spoken to Evelyn Tribbley, and what I do love is I love her ability on how she acknowledges her privilege when she initially, cast the vision of the intuitive eating movement, and now is really doing like a lot of reframing on like how do you actually make this accessible for all body sizes and different genders. And so I am, just like you said, I love it. What is satisfaction? What is fullness? And getting to work with those through those parts that, diet culture often teaches us to suppress.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And, I think that there's this real strange stigma against eating and enjoying food. And yet we have this really ubiquitous food culture, Food Network, all the food magazines, the food blogs, the Instagram. And so, like, it's such a weird mixed message that we give.
And it's so interesting, that term intuitive. I mean, it's kind of just getting back to the basics and what our bodies are really calling out for, it sounds like, knowing nothing about it. And we've been speaking about these other terms that are kind of judgments, clean eating and junk food, and these judgments that society has placed upon how we eat. And into it sounds like it's just getting in touch with what you actually need.
One that I bristle every time I hear people say cheat day, as if like there's one unethical day of the week in which you are cheating your body of goodness by eating. I think it was like in the early 2000s. I think it was that book Body for Life. That was one of these like, kind of restrictive diets that allowed you one day of indulgence. And this idea of cheating is something that every time I hear, I just like it just makes me feel really like uncomfortable. This idea that enjoying food is cheating something or someone or doing something deceptive.
Yeah. Yeah. We had the journalist Soleil on the previous episode, and she was talking about how she hates food journalism that uses the term addictive. A similar note. The language really does imply so much. We do need to wrap it up soon, but I'm just sort of curious before we go, how you're all feeling about this could be a whole other topic, but I'm just dying to hear your thoughts about the whole pandemic, the dieting during the pandemic, the guilt about not dieting during the pandemic. What are you all hearing, and what are you all thinking about this?
Well, we're seeing a lot of rhetoric around, COVID weight, and, it's COVID, pounds don't matter. And it's just another sort of publicly sanctioned way for people to obsess about their weight and their bodies, and also have the cover to eat what they want and then excuse it, as if it's an excuse, which it doesn't. It's actually really sad. And I find myself falling into the trap too. Like, I've been talking to friends and I'm like, my goal is to not gain any weight and not become an alcoholic. And, I feel like those are pretty manageable goals. But at the same time, like, so what if I gain weight? Like, the world will not come to an end, and that's okay. And so now when I hear it in myself. And so when I hear it in other people, I don't chastise them, because I think we're all doing the best we can right now. But I do hear it and I do think, oh man, you don't have to justify it. Eat what you want.
No day is a cheat day when you're all quarantined and
it's like we're trying to like cheat death right now. I mean, I think the thing that's interesting during this period of time is that food as pleasure has like returned to my life because I'm home, and watching other people cook and wanting to like spend time preparing meals I have found, particularly restorative during this time. But I think the thing that adds a level of people's anxiety about their bodies and their looks is that a lot of people are not getting haircuts. I know that, I haven't done the type of grooming that I like with my eyebrows. And then we spend a lot of time on Zoom. And for people who aren't used to being on camera, you're seeing yourself in this very different way. So I think that this is like, for many reasons, an incredible moment in which people are not only grappling with ideas about their bodies, but appearances and all of these things that are wrapped up into it. So it'll be really interesting to see the types of things people write about this period of time in the relationship to self as a result.
Wow, that was a wonderful place to wrap up the conversation. Thank you, Marcia. And now is the part of the show where we do our dessert course, in which we each share something that we've been enjoying lately that just has anything to do with food or drink. So, Marcia, I believe earlier in this discussion, or perhaps it was Whitney, you were mentioning that there are some folks who literally have no place to get food other than a convenience store, and so expecting these types of families to maintain a nutritious, well-rounded diet is pretty ridiculous. And I've been thinking lately, since a couple episodes ago when we were talking about food and fiction, it came up, the best fiction always has food as part of it, and food sort of becomes part of the plot. So a couple of novels came to mind as I was sort of thinking about all these things. The Book of Unknown Americans by Cristina Enriquez. The family that immigrates to the U.S., they start out, they're just shopping at the gas station because they can't figure out where to find the food that they need and the food that they like to cook. They don't even know where a grocery store could be. So they're going to the gas station and they don't even recognize the salsa. It's pretty funny. And then another book I just started that I'm really enjoying is The Night Watchman by Louise Erdrich. And there's a very early in the book, you can tell it's going to be a good book because food comes up right away. There's a character who forgets to fry the dough to make a gullet bread. And so she shows up at work with a bucket full of uncooked dough. And that just kind of tells you everything you need to know about this, what's going on in this woman's life. So would anyone else like to share a little dessert item?
Sure. My dessert item is something I use to make dessert items. My KitchenAid
Love
mixer.
it.
And I'm obsessed with it. It's just such a workhorse. It will last forever and ever and ever. And it can make bread, and it can do cookies and cakes and whipped cream. Anyway, it's just a lot of fun. And I find it very soothing to listen to it. And I also use it as a pasta maker.
I'm very impressed. I used to have a KitchenAid mixer and I lost it in my divorce, but then I was kind of glad.
Oh my God, that's so upsetting.
I was kind of glad because I was never much of a baker. I couldn't figure out what to do with it. So I'm very impressed, Roxane.
Oh, wow. I'm just so sad. Like, I'm still stuck on that you lost it in your divorce.
Me too. We need to get Catherine a KitchenAid mixer. Yeah, we need to get that for you.
Get that back.
I still have my Cuisinart, so it's all good. How about you, Whitney? Did you have a dessert item to share?
Yeah, so I'm gonna second the KitchenAid mixer. I love making. One of the things we're doing now is we're going through all of the Disney movies. I'm a huge Disney fan. I'm getting my daughter accustomed to all the Disney classics. So we usually try a different dessert when we have our family movie nights. So
fun.
Yeah.
How about you, Marcia?
So the pandemic hit when I was on my book tour. And so I had to cancel like 17 events. I was deeply depressed when this happened. And so I was like, I had some downtime. So I downloaded, I got a subscription to Masterclass, and I started taking the cooking classes on it. And Thomas Keller's apple pie, in which he uses 18 apples in order to make a single pie, which is amazing. So I've really enjoyed that. And the one thing I will say, in the 6 months that I have gone nowhere, I have to say it's been really fascinating to spend so much time with my husband because I'm usually so on the road. And every Friday night we eat pizza, and it's pizza night at our home, and we take it very seriously, and we order out, or sometimes we'll even eat a frozen pizza. But I feel like the gift of this period of time has been family time in a new way. So my frozen pizza and my artisan apple pies are my two favorite discoveries.
For sure. Yeah. Well, thank you, all of you amazing panelists, Dr. Marcia Chatelain, author and distinguished professor of history and African American studies at Georgetown University, Roxane Gay, an author many times over, advice columnist, contributing op-ed writer at the New York Times, co-host of the Here to Slay podcast, and many other things besides, and Whitney Trotter, MS, RD, LDN, RN, BSN, and you'll soon have another thing to put after your name when you get your PhD, is founder of Bluff City Health in Memphis and co-founder and board director of RestoreCorps, an organization fighting against human trafficking. Thank you all for joining us. This has been so interesting. I am Catherine Cole here in the high-fiber, protein-packed city of Portland, Oregon. Thank you, everyone.
This episode of The Foretop was recorded in remote locations all over the United States. Catherine Cole is our host and executive producer. Izzy Kramer is our producer. I'm Keelan King, editor and audio technician. You can check out our website, theforetop.org, to learn more about us, listen to back episodes, donate to the show, and reach out to us on social media. And if you have not already subscribed to The Foretop on iTunes, NPR One, or Spotify, please do so and leave us a rating. Stay safe out there.
Well, now that episode is over, you're probably wondering what to listen to next. Let me tell you about Spilled Milk. It's a comedy show about food hosted by award-winning writers Molly Weisenberg and Matthew Amster Burton. Every week, they start with a food-related topic, from shrimp cocktail to barbecue sauce to ice cream sandwiches, but they probably end up talking about their love of Cool Ranch Doritos or debating who was the most bleepable character on Friday Night Lights. The New York Times recently named Spilled Milk one of the 6 podcasts to feed your inner gourmand and described the show as less deliberately educational than other food podcasts. On a personal note, I want to add that I really enjoyed Molly Weisenberg's recent book. It's called The Fixed Stars. And, we were lucky enough to have Molly and Matthew on the Foretop on episode 36, which was recorded live at PodCon. So check out that episode at theforetop.org and you can give it a listen. New episodes of Spilled Milk air every Thursday. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And thanks, Spilled Milk, for partnering with The Foretop.